Thank you so much for being here, everyone. My name is Susan Demas. I'm the executive editor of Lincoln Square, and I'm really honored to be joined today by Thom Hartmann. He is a legendary radio host, author, progressive political commentator. He also happens to be a fellow Michigander from Grand Rapids. I'm in Lansing, so it's always
I grew
nice
up in
to.
Lansing.
I
I was,
had
I was
read
born in
that.
Grand Rapids, but I grew up in
Great.
Lansing.
Okay, great. I'm like right by Michigan State University, so
Oh,
it's
great.
it's
Yeah.
yeah. So it's always nice to meet another Michigander.
Yeah.
And of course, he is the host of the Thom Hartmann program, as he has been since 2003, and now he is with us. So thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me, Susan. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here with you.
Oh, thank you. Well, Tom, you're so prolific and we love your writing. I thought that we would talk a little bit about some of the stories that you've been highlighting because there is so much going on. We all know that Trump likes to flood the zone. That's one of his strategies. But as a result, some very big stories end up being below the radar, especially in the mainstream media. And I think one of those stories was one that you highlighted about, we're going to face these massive Medicaid cuts, as we know from Trump's budget. But his Secretary of Agriculture has a pretty innovative solution. If you'd like to keep your benefits, you could go out and place all of those migrant workers who are of course being rounded up by the ever-growing ICE police force. And that can be your way to keep benefits. And your graphic there of the folks in wheelchairs, out in the fields, it really kind of brings this issue home. There's an absurdism to it, but there's also a cruelty. Can you tell us a little bit about, you know, what we might be seeing now as people are just going to be scrambling for healthcare?
Yeah. Well. First, with regard to Brooke Rollins, our agriculture secretary, and her assertion that, and people, that there's a labor shortage now because this racist purging America of brown people policy that Thom Hartmann and Stephen Miller have been so excited about is causing a loss of labor in the fields. And so basically, hey, you want your Medicare benefits, just get out there and pick strawberries. Um, I'm not opposed to hard work, or for that matter, generally work requirements. But this is beyond the pale. It's absurd. It's largely obscene, and and in fact, let me retract my statement about work requirements. I think that healthcare should be a right of every person in the United States, of citizenship, as it is in the other 33 OECD countries. We are the only developed nation in the world where where 500,000 people go bankrupt every year because somebody got sick. That's obscene. It's morally obscene. It's wrong. The estimates are that for every 800 people who do not have access to healthcare or insurance to pay for it, can't pay for healthcare, one will die in any given year. And so, if you do the math on that, on the millions of people that are going to be pushed off Medicaid by these expanded paperwork requirements, and that's really the essence of it. Somebody made a comment this morning on one of the shows that, if I had to renew my driver's license every 6 months, I'd quit driving. I'd just say to hell with it. I'll use Uber.
And
And
this is by design, because they
exactly.
do want to kick people off.
Exactly. And that's the whole point. And so if they kick, 10, 15,000 people or a million people off healthcare, what you're going to end up with is 50 or 60,000 dead people every year. Dead Americans who wouldn't have been dead if they'd gotten that mammogram, if they'd gotten that colonoscopy, if they'd gotten that mole looked at, if they had somebody tell them, why they had that pain in their gut. But instead, by the time, it reaches the point where they just can't deny it any longer, it's untreatable, and they're dying. And so that's, thousands of deaths. I would say tens of thousands of deaths every year. And so this is, like I said, this is a moral crisis as much as
Mhm.
it is a political crisis. And then when you to compound that, they're doing this in the name of freeing up money to give tax breaks to Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk. I mean, and Betsy DeVos and Donald Trump and the other 13 billionaires that are in his cabinet right now. This obscene is not a strong enough word, and I don't, I lack a word for this. It's dancing up against the edge of genocide, really. The mass slaughter of American people for profit, for money. And now we're also seeing, with these no bid contracts, down in Florida, Alligator Auschwitz was built by a major campaign donor of Ron DeSantis's on a no bid contract. These sweetheart deals. It's costing $500, $600, $700 a day per person to lock these people up because of the obscene profits being made. There are, when Hitler went down, I lived in Germany for 2 years, 86, 87. I've been to Dachau, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 times. I used to, when people would come visit, they'd always want to go see Dachau because I lived just about about an hour away. And it was at the time that Hitler, when Germany lost the war, there were 500 and, as I recall, 540 or 570. It was between 500 and 600 of these work camps around Germany. The death camps were outside Germany.
Poland.
Just like George W. Bush did his extraordinary rendition to Egypt and other places where they torture people to death outside the United States, just like Gitmo is outside the United States. But the labor camps where they put the socialists, where they put the union leaders, where they put the religious leaders that refused to bow to him, where they put the writers and journalists who had written poorly of him even before he became chancellor, those people ended up in places like Dachau. And it sure looks to me, I mean, we now have over 200 ICE detention facilities in the United States. It sure looks to me like Donald Trump got the memo and he's following the plan.
What's striking to
I'm sorry.
Please go ahead.
Answer your question. I just realized I hadn't answered your question, which is, what's it going to look like when people don't have health care? This is being compounded by 2 other factors. One is that there's a proposal right now to have real Medicare. Now, this will mostly affect older people, although some people qualify for Medicare if they're on Social Security, disability, things like that. But to have real Medicare, which right now does not have prior authorization. You don't have to go to Medicare and say, or your doctor doesn't have to go and say, please, may I prescribe a CT scan for this person or a mammogram or whatever, like with Medicare Advantage, with this giant for-profit
private,
right. Right. So this Republican proposal is to have these big companies like United Healthcare now act as independent contractors with Medicare and run private prior authorization for all Medicare. And that all people, when they first enroll in Medicare for the first 3 years, will be forced into a Medicare Advantage plan. That's going to create another crisis because we know that, tens of thousands of people are denied care literally every day in the United States because they have Medicare Advantage plans. So you've got that. And then on top of that, they're kneecapping Obamacare. I mean, we're looking at the possibility of doubling insurance rates over the course of the next 12 months as a result of this big, beautiful bill, this big, ugly bill that just got passed. And so when you combine these 3 things, it's a prescription for mass death. It's a prescription for sickness. It's as if, if Vladimir Putin called up the president of the United States and said, I want you to destroy your country. I'll reward you really, really well. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to destroy the education department, dumb people down. I want you to destroy your healthcare system so you no longer have a productive workforce. And I want you to destroy your economy, by throwing your country into massive, massive debt and producing inflation. I want you to destroy your soft power all around the world by shutting down USAID. I want you to destroy your propaganda operations that promote democracy by shutting down the Voice of America or putting, right-wing cranks on it. And actually, there's, I could come up with a list of about 15 things, and I have in the past, as you know, you read my newsletter. And it's like, I can't come up with any other explanation for why Trump is doing this than that he wants to turn America into Russia, or he has been told this is his job. And, you know, that's, you know, you look at Trump's history and you can say, yeah, okay, that's credible. But why are all these other Republicans going along with it? Is it just that they're terrified of Trump? Is it just that they're, you know, like the judges who are getting pizzas delivered to them in the middle of the night by way of saying, we know where you live and we can kill you, like we killed the son of Judge Salas? Is it that they're terrified? Is it that they want to stay on the gravy train? Is it they want to make sure that when they leave Congress, they've got that $1 million a year lobbyist job? Is it that they just love the power? I mean, I can't make sense out of this, Susan. I just can't. And maybe you can illuminate me, but this whole situation is just, you know, my father's generation, you know, he volunteered for World War II straight out of high school when he was 17 years old. And that generation, if they were still around, would look at this and go, holy crap, this is what Khrushchev predicted in 1956 when he said, I will bury you.
And I mean, this is the sort of fascist system that, you know, your father, my grandfather fought against in World War II, and now it's here on our home front.
Yep.
For me, the striking thing about what is going on with healthcare in this country is that we just had a massive pandemic that killed 1 million people unnecessarily because there was so much anti-vax propaganda out there. It became a real symbol on the right not to take just basic health precautions, and so there was no reason why COVID had to be as deadly as it was. But for us to have not learned the lesson about how important it is for us to build up our healthcare system, for us to have sick leave, which again, we are an outlier with, you know, developed and non-developed countries, that we don't have a national sick leave policy. And instead for us to say, 1 million, we're just getting warmed up. Let's see how many more people can die by not getting basic care in a country that's the most medically advanced in the world. And while we're doing it, let's also kill our scientific research into diseases like cancer and Alzheimer's. And you know, basically, we are making life worse in so many different ways. It's a real ripping apart of society, and it's very disorienting to see.
Yeah, they're trying to destroy our country. There's no other possible way to describe it. They're trying to destroy our country. I mean, we've got a measles epidemic going on right now. You know, measles was declared ended in America in 2000, just 25 years ago, and then this anti-vax BS begins. You know, you've got the head of HHS, Bob Kennedy. I won't use the name he uses because that's his father, and his father was a hero of mine, and I respected his father. But Bob is you know, just constantly lying and getting caught on it. I guess that's good news. But you know, and I knew this guy for years, and it's just I don't get it. Pardon me, I just don't get it. It's anyway.
Hey, did you see this evolution coming with him?
You know, we were both on Air America together back in the
Mm-hmm.
day. I wrote the business plan and helped start Air America, and he used to be on my program from time to time, and we would talk about vaccines, and the way he presented it at that time was that his concern was that giving children 3 different vaccines at once, in the MMR vaccine when they're very young, might be dangerous, and we should space these things out every 6 months, which made sense to me. I mean, I never challenged him on that. That didn't seem unreasonable. I never realized that underneath that was this, you know, this glacier, this slow moving glacier of just insanity, of anti-vax insanity. So, you know, live and learn.
He seems to have that same strain of megalomania that Trump does, you know, and
Oh, he
they
can be very
seem,
charming. I don't,
yes.
I can't, I don't know him well enough to you know, put my psychotherapist hat on and diagnose him, you know, but maybe I do, but I wouldn't be willing to.
You mentioned, you know, the most notorious of these ICE camps, you know, what the media has called Alligator Alcatraz, which, you know, I think is much too cutesy of a name. But the conditions are horrific. I mean, Florida in the summer in the Everglades, it's 110 degrees, it's humid. The conditions there are just, it's squalor. And we know that people are going to get sick and die there. And we're probably not even going to know the extent of it because secrecy is another part of the Trump administration. You flagged an ad that our colleagues at the Lincoln Project did on kind of turning this idea on its head as a warning to Republicans, as a way to fight back and message. And so I was wondering, Josh can roll that, and then if we can talk a little bit about getting into fighting back and tactics, because that's just so crucial for all of us right now.
Yeah, this ad is brilliant.
Alligator Alcatraz, an impregnable prison camp surrounded by miles of the most deadly parts of Florida. Poisonous snakes, fierce and hungry alligators, miles of unmapped swamps, storms, hurricanes, fierce heat. No one's getting out of Alligator Alcatraz. The people in Alligator Alcatraz are subhumans, the worst of the worst. Alligator Alcatraz is going to teach these criminals a lesson. If you're upset by Alligator Alcatraz, just wait. Because when the Trump era ends, we're keeping it open for the corrupt crypto scammers like Don Jr., who cashed in on the presidency. Keeping it open for folks like Stephen Miller, Kristi Noem, and Thom Hartmann, who ignore the law, ignore court orders, and deploy masked cops in warrantless raids. We're even keeping it open for the state and federal agents who abuse their power. You built this, MAGA, and some of you will enjoy the view from inside the wire.
You said in your newsletter that this was an example that Democrats could draw from Republicans to take names and kick ass.
Yeah.
And kind of contrasting it with the strongly worded letters of Chuck Schumer, for instance, which
tragically,
I know is still infuriating for us. Talk to us about the most effective way that we can stand up in these times, against an ever expanding authoritarian state.
Well, wow, this happens at a bunch of different levels. I mean, there's the 3.5% theory that suggests that if 3.5% of us get out in the streets and raise hell, that historically movements that have hit that threshold are movements that end up succeeding. And it may be a little too glib, and I'm concerned that the big event was probably Trump's birthday because it got so much publicity, and the other events probably won't. And they'll probably get smaller over time. I hope not. I hope they get larger over time, but we'll see. But we're not there yet. I mean, but still getting out in the streets. I mean, look at what happened in South Korea last year when the president of South Korea decided that he was going to declare a state of emergency and name himself dictator. And basically, initially, the army was with him, and the police were with him. And then the people showed up in the streets, and it just became, I'm guessing they were well over 3.5%. We've seen these kinds of things, the color revolutions. There was one in the country of Georgia. There was one, of course, in Ukraine. These kind of things should inspire us, and we should learn from them, first off. Secondly, Jason Stanley and Timothy Snyder have written some brilliant books and offer us some great advice, don't obey in advance, and, all these other things that, use the courts, but the courts are not going to save us. The Supreme Court has made that very clear. We have 6 corrupt on the take toadies, 2 of them openly taking, basically vacation bribes and gifts from billionaires. John Roberts' wife has taken over $10 million from high-end law firms. They're just, it's really a tragedy what's happened to our Supreme Court. And thank God Sonia Sotomayor and Justice Elena Kagan, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson is calling them out, are calling them out in just very blunt terms. I mean, this is just strong stuff. We need to continue fighting in the courts, but I do not think that that's going to be our salvation. And then at the state level, you've got the possibility of fighting fire with fire. I have been saying for some time that democratic states, there was this trend that started in the late 80s and through the 90s of democratic states ungerrymandering their states. They need to re-gerrymander the hell out of these states. And Gavin Newsom kind of threatened that yesterday. If Texas does this, they should just be doing it. And every blue state in the country, and we could take back the House and hold it forever if we did that.
I understand, that goes against like that knee-jerk good government.
I know. Democrats like to be nice people.
Right.
The other thing is, in 2018, in the Husted decision, John Husted was the Secretary of State in Ohio. He was mailing postcards into largely black neighborhoods in the big cities in Cincinnati and Cleveland. And the postcards looked like junk mail. And they basically said, if you don't return this card, then we will pull you off the voting rolls because we'll assume you've moved. And that's called caging. And for over 30 years, the Republican Party had a standing court order preventing them from doing this. Well, the Supreme Court overturned that in 2018 and said, no, that's perfectly legal. You can do that. And it is being done with an incredible ferocity. Greg Palast did the math using nothing but official federal and state statistics for the 2024 election, and found that 4.2 million people, most of them in swing states, were either purged from the voting rolls just before the election, or their signatures were challenged on mail-in ballots, and their ballots were never counted. 4.2 million people, and had those people's votes been counted, Kamala Harris, there's no doubt, would have become president, and we would probably have control of both the House and the Senate right now. They are putting that on steroids. It's going to be 8 million people in the next couple of years. They are mailing out those postcards right now in the red states, into the blue cities. In Georgia, they're mailing them into Atlanta. In Ohio, they're mailing them into Cincinnati. They are doing this across the country, and you're going into Houston and Dallas and Texas. They're going to the big cities of Florida. They are mailing out those postcards like there's no tomorrow, and they are purging millions and millions and millions of people. And not one single blue state is doing this. And I've been saying for some time, and I've, as you know, Ro Khanna and Mark Pocan are just regulars on my show every other week. And I have pitched this to them, and they say, no, we don't want to do that. But I'm saying, blue states need to start doing this and mailing these postcards into largely Republican voting areas. And what that will do is, A, it'll level the playing field, but B, probably more importantly, is it'll cause the Republicans to freak out and start screaming about it. And then something might get done. We might recriminalize that. I think Democrats need to fight fire with fire. I think that they need to, as you said, take names and kick ass. And it's way beyond time to be doing that.
But, you can see the institutional, powers that be on the Democratic Party, even people, who are on the progressive side, like Ro Khanna and Mark Pocan. It seems to really go against, that DNA of the Democratic Party, because it's like we want to be fair, we want a fair system.
We want to do the right thing. We want to be a good example. And just like the socialists and Democrats in Germany said in 1933.
But when you're facing autocracy, when you're facing an unfair system, playing by the rules doesn't really get you very far sometimes. And nobody's talking about breaking the law, but this is when raw politics comes in. This is when people power comes in, because we're trying to save ourselves, and strongly worded letters really don't get us there.
No, and the Supreme Court legalized this,
right.
This and gerrymandering. And they said, please do it. And Democrats said, oh, we're too noble.
And you have states like in Illinois that they've gone against that grain. It's a blue state, and they've gerrymandered it very well. They might be able to squeeze another seat out. I'm sure California, which does have a nonpartisan commission, might be a little more difficult there, but they do have a majority Democratic legislature and governor, so
Right. We can blow up
there
that
is some
commission.
power there. But every time Democrats try and gerrymander like they did in Maryland, and that went to the Supreme Court. There's always the tisk tisk tisk. Everybody does it, both sides. But historically, when we look at gerrymandering, it's been far worse in these red states. Ohio used to be a swing state. One of the reasons why it's not is because it's been so heavily gerrymandered. Texas, they just want to, as you pointed out, they're ready to gerrymander again. This is becoming something they do every couple years now. They don't wait till the census comes out. And with a state like Texas, it looks like they're trying to squeeze 5 more Republican seats out of this to do a buffer against a potential wave next year for Democrats. I mean, these are not fair tactics.
No, they're not. But they are legal.
Yes.
And if it is legal, Democrats should be doing it, in my opinion. And I realize I'm a radical outlier here.
But if no one is saying it, then the ideas don't get out there. And, in talking with so many, Democratic members of Congress, obviously they don't like what Trump is doing, but they're still reticent to describe what's going on as autocracy or fascism. And I know that those words seem scary, but what's going on out there is scary. Having the city of Los Angeles taken over by the Marines, by the National Guard, by ICE, that's not something that I grew up thinking was part of America. And, these are not ordinary times. And I know that, you've studied history and authoritarian governments and movements across the world. What lessons can we learn from resistance that's been successful?
Well, never give up. I mean, just fight back and fight back and fight back. I wrote a book, the Hidden History of Oligarchy, American Oligarchy, and America's actually been through this before. In the 18 teens, it was 1897 or 1797 actually. Eli Whitney invented the cotton gin, but it didn't go into popular sale until around 1810. And one machine could do the work of 50 enslaved people cleaning cotton. But they were very expensive, and so only the largest plantations could afford them. So what happened from 1810 until around 1840 was the large plantations got wealthier and wealthier and just basically drove all the smaller farming operations out of business. Those people became sharecroppers. And the roughly 1,000, maybe 2,000 families ended up controlling the South. They ended democracy by 1845, 1850. It was gone. If you were a white person and you spoke out against them, you would get lynched. If you ran against them politically, you would be destroyed. If you voted against them, you could have your house burned down. White people. And, and that's, on top of the horrors that were happening to Black people, of course. And they had turned the South by 1855. The South was a fully fascistic state. There was no democracy left. There was no rule of law left. It was a completely corrupt fascistic state. And then, in 1861, they declared war on the United States because we were a bad example. We were, and there you had white people who were fleeing the South, poor white people fleeing the South. And it took 700,000 lives in a bloody civil war to end that. But the United States has had a serious brush with fascism before. And we don't teach that enough in our schools. Instead, when Louise and I moved to Atlanta back in 1981 or 2, our son was then 7, 8 years old. And I remember one day he came home from school and we were talking over dinner and I said, "What'd you learn in school today?" And he said, "We learned about the war of Northern aggression."
Oh.
It's like, oh. So, we've got to educate people. We've got to teach people, that we've been here before. We've fought back against this. This is part of the American tradition. We didn't just fight the British. We also fought the Confederates. And when people wave that flag, that's the flag of treason. And,
Yeah.
and
And
it's the
to
flag
see that flag waving in the halls of Congress during January 6th, to me, was one of the most disgusting parts of
Yes.
that day.
Yeah, I agree.
Because that goes against everything that we are supposed to be as a country and that we have overcome. And clearly we have not.
The other big point that I would make is, again, my book on oligarchy, is that in 1976, in the Buckley versus Vallejo decision, the Supreme Court ruled. This was the case. This was Bill Buckley's brother, James Buckley, who was a very wealthy guy, and he wanted to finance his own Senate campaign, and that ran up against campaign finance laws. So they said, if you're rich, you can finance your own campaign. That's when the Republicans started recruiting rich people. At that point in time, most people in Congress are middle class.
Right.
And about half the Senate. And then 2 years later, 3 years later, in 78, 2 years later, in a decision that was written by Lewis Powell himself, who Nixon put on the court in 72, the year after the Powell memo, called First National Bank versus Bellotti, they not only doubled down on that, but ruled that corporations are persons, and therefore they have those same free speech rights, that their money is the same thing as free speech, and it's protected by the First Amendment. Citizens United, of course, put that on steroids. I mean, just shot it into the sky like one of Jeff Bezos's penis-shaped rockets, and just blew the whole thing up. And that has to be where we put our focus. Franklin Roosevelt rose to power in 1933 after the Republican Great Depression had been going on for 3-4 years. And by the way, it was called the Republican Great Depression back then. They stopped calling it that when Eisenhower got elected in 52. He came to power by calling these people out.
Yeah, I welcome their hatred. That was his comment about bankers.
They hate me and I welcome their hatred. They tried to assassinate him. They tried to kidnap him and assassinate him. He called them out constantly. I mean, probably the most important political speech in the history of America, in my opinion, is his 1936 acceptance speech in Philadelphia in August, I believe it was, of 1936 in Philadelphia. And there's 5 or 6 paragraphs of that speech that should be made into a movie everybody should read, where he talks about it was human and perhaps natural that these privileged princes thirsting for power would rise up and try to seize the reins of government. He said, they complain that we seek to overthrow the institutions. What they really complain about is that we seek to take away their power. And our loyalty to American democracy requires the overthrow of that kind of power. I mean, he just, bam, lays it out like that. And that's how Democrats need to be talking now. They need to take a lesson from Franklin Roosevelt.
If Democrats are able to get back in a place of power, what concrete steps do they need to take against the oligarchy? Because I think it's pretty clear. We can see the through line through history in the United States and where we are today, where you have, the wealthiest in this country are literally the only people who are set to do okay under the Trump regime. It seems to me that in order to really get our country back and move it forward, that's where we have to start. And what steps would we take?
Well, the Buckley and Bellotti decisions in the 70s made the Reagan presidency possible. Reagan floated into the White House in 1980 on 2 things. Number one, he committed treason. He cut a deal with the Iranian Ayatollahs to hold the hostages. But number 2, there was just a tsunami of oil industry money that floated him in. Those 2 decisions and the subsequent ones, Citizens United and McCutcheon, need to be reversed. And they can be reversed by Congress. Article 3, Section 2 of the Constitution says that the United States Supreme Court shall operate under regulations written by Congress. And there's another phrase that has to do with it. But basically, Congress can overturn pretty much anything the Supreme Court does or says. And Congress needs to do that. We just need to overturn that. That's the main cancer. That's the thing that has metastasized through our whole entire system, is this dark money and big money. And so that that'll take us 80% of the way down the road. Just that simple thing of going back to the kind of limits on campaign spending that existed in the United States in the period that was immediately, during the Jerry Ford administration, when these good government laws came into place as a result of the horrors of the Nixon bribery scandals and the Agnew bribery scandals and stuff like that.
Would it also
beyond
help?
that,
Yeah, I was
if I
just
may,
wondering if it would help for us to not just undo the tax cuts for the wealthy, but to go back perhaps to the Eisenhower tax rates where the
yeah.
wealthy actually had to pay something.
Yeah, well, let me just add one other codicil here. We also need to make voting a right in the United States. We're the only fully developed democracy where voting is not a right. Louise and I just spent a week in Norway. When you're born, you're registered to vote. You're also registered for the national healthcare system. You can go to college for free. And that's true across pretty much all of Europe. We need to make voting a right. It's insane that if a state wants to take away your gun, they have to go before a judge and prove that there's a reason. But if they want to take away your vote, they don't even have to tell you. And this, again, is Supreme Court policy. This can be overturned. In terms of taxation, we used to have rational taxation. We had a top 90% income tax bracket, and we had a top 55% corporate income tax bracket. And that seems like really, really high. But you have income taxes for two reasons. One is, of course, to raise revenue. But the more important reason is to affect behavior. If you've got a high corporate income tax rate, to deal with that one first, what you do is you create a bunch of loopholes that are behaviors that you want. So if a company is showing a lot of profit and they want to not have to pay taxes on that profit, they can engage in research and development and develop new products. They can pay their employees better. They can provide them with benefits. These are all tax deductible expenses. So they reduce the tax load, they reduce the taxable profit. And that's how it was in the United States prior to the Reagan Revolution. It was in 1983 that Reagan legalized stock buybacks, which is just a huge scam. It was a felony. It was made a felony in the 30s, under the administration of Joe Kennedy, because it was considered stock manipulation. So we need to go back to encouraging corporations to do something more than simply transfer as much wealth as possible to their CEOs and their stockholders. With regard to the top income tax rate for individuals, when Reagan came into office, the average CEO in the United States made 30 times what the average worker did. CEOs lived in regular neighborhoods. They might have the nicest house in the neighborhood, but they lived in regular neighborhoods. You go back and look at some of the old TV shows from the 60s, where you had people, the Dick Van Dyke Show. You've got the guy who's the producer of a national television program, right? Today, that person's making $10-20 million a year. Back then, he was living in an apartment, right? In New York. I'm not saying that we should, return to that everybody should live more simply or humbly, but the simple fact of the matter was that after you made your first roughly $1 million in today's dollars, you started hitting these really high tax rates that were just crazy. And so the CEOs just kept that money in the company and used it instead to pay good salaries, engage in R&D, develop new products, expand product lines, all these kinds of things. So these high tax rates are not actually confiscatory. They're not actually punishment. They're not, the way that billionaires like to characterize them and the press likes to characterize them. They encouraged good, positive, productive, pro-social, pro-American behavior, just right across the board. And we need to be getting back to those things.
Right. I mean, if the CEO's kids go to the same schools as, their workers, that's more of a sense of community than if you are in a gated community and a house on the hill and your children are privately homeschooled next to your indoor pool. It just creates a huge divide in this country. And we've normalized that, when you look at like Jeff Bezos's wedding, that's something to aspire to instead of looking at how disgusting it is that people can't even go travel in a city. They have to bow down to an oligarch who has to have a second or third marriage.
Yeah, it's Great Gatsby. And the other part that's just astonishing is how the billionaires have succeeded in convincing average working people that taxes work the same way for them that they do for billionaires. If a rich person gets a tax break, they get extra money and they can just stick it in their money bin, and they can invest it however they want. Most working class people, if they get a tax cut, they think, oh boy, I've got extra money. But here's the deal. This is the little secret that most people don't realize until you explain it. There's a market for labor. An economist, David Ricardo, laid this out in 1918 or in 1819 in his book. It's called The Iron Law of Labor. I forget the title of his book. And what it says is that for every basic job category, there's a marketplace for that labor, and there's a set point. There's a normal pay point for that. And that normal pay point is after-tax income. So say somebody's earning $50,000 a year working on the line at General Motors, and which is about in today's dollars, 50,000 is about what they were making back in the 80s, and they're paying $20,000 a year in income taxes. So they're taking home $30,000 a year. So what General Motors knows is that they can hire people for $30,000 a year, in their pocket, right? That's how much you have to pay somebody to work on the assembly line. Less than that, they won't do it. More than that, you're wasting money. So now these people get a tax cut. They get the Reagan tax cut, right? And suddenly that $50,000 that they're only taking home $30,000, now they're taking home $35,000. Well, what happens? General Motors looks at that and goes, whoa, they just got a $5,000 raise. Reduce their pay from $50,000 down to $45,000. And that's why, starting with the Reagan tax cuts in the 1980s up until today, you've seen this steady deterioration of wages on the bottom half of the pay scale, because as taxes have gone down because when Reagan and Bush and Trump did their tax cuts, they did cut taxes for average working people too, smaller, but they did cut those taxes. Mm-hmm. And what that does is it causes wages to go down. It doesn't make people richer, it makes them poorer. And it's just, this just kind of simple economic stuff we should be teaching in high school. We should be teaching these histories. We should be teaching, that we're not. And, a lot of that, of course, goes back to the Reagan Revolution and Bill Bennett, Reagan's Secretary of Education, who famously, probably his most famous quote is, if you want to reduce crime in America, just abort every black baby. And then after he said that, he defended it. He went on ABC TV and defended it. Those are the kind of people that have just screwed this country up terribly.
Well, I hate to end on a down note, but I do.
If we can do these things, we can get our country back.
We can.
That's an upvote.
And every week, daily, you are writing about the tools that we need to do that, and that's so important. And of course, how else can we find you with your radio show and everything else that you do?
Basically, I have two websites that we use a lot. Hartmann Report is my daily take, which is my opening rant on my show, and it's my daily op-ed. You showed a clip, or an example of one of them. And then I've got a site called thom.tv, thom.tv, which is the site for our TV and radio show. And so those two sites will give you anything and everything you need to know.
It's such a resource, and it really is a great place to find stories that are going to be buried on mainstream websites. So it's a great resource. You should check it out. And Thom, I certainly hope that you'll come by and see us again. I know that I've learned an awful lot. I'm sure everyone else has as well.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you.